Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such an amazing place to live, work, and play. You know, this past week has been a series of terrific conversations about leadership in coastal Mississippi. We've talked to a couple of mayors. We've checked in with some of our museums. We had a terrific conversation with leaders in the dyslexia community. And I shared my story of dyslexia. And we talked about an important bill that's in front of the legislature as we speak. But it's been a great year. A great year, a great week. It's been a great year, too, for matter of fact. But today is Friday, and so we're going to move real quickly over to my friend Jeff Duncan, who is a columnist and writer, award-winning, on the NFL Hall of Fame committee with NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. He's a good friend. How you doing, Jeff?
Ricky, I'm doing great, man. We've had a great run of weather. Getting ready to get really busy over here with the Saints, obviously with free agency coming up. So it's a good time to chill before the storm hits next week.
Woo, I know it is. Listen, we're going to talk about the latest on Carr, the column that you just wrote about Michael. My mind just went totally blank.
Thomas.
Isn't that something? You look at somebody's name. I looked over at some notes and I'm like, what the world? But of course, Michael Thomas. Hey man, that's authenticity, man. That's the way it works here. We're going to be authentic about that. We won't even edit that out. But listen, we're going to talk about that in a minute. I want to really come back to something that you and I have teased the last couple of weeks, and we haven't really had the opportunity to chat about it, but I didn't want to run out of time today. You are deep into your process with Team Gleason, in particular, Steve Gleason and his wife, and I guess others as well, writing Steve's book. And what's the latest on that?
Well, we got a deadline approaching. It's looming over our heads every day. I mean, we're trying to turn the manuscript in sometime in May. That's not far away. As you know, these things sneak up on you very quickly. But we want the book to try and come out around the holidays. I'm not sure if we're going to make that deadline or not. If not, it'll be out in the spring of 2024. But it's basically just Steve's memoirs, you know, his story of his life, touches on his New Orleans Saints career, and of course married Michelle, a New Orleans girl. And I don't think a lot of people are maybe familiar with his whole background in Spokane, Washington, and really the extraordinary story about him now coming up on, 13 years since his diagnosis. I've tried to nail down, Ricky, just how many people have, survived with the disease as long as Steve has. It's not a lot. I mean, 30,000 people basically in the country living with ALS right now. But it's such a cruel disease. Most people, the life expectancy is 2 to 5 years because the disease moves so rapidly and the progression of the disease. But Steve is now coming on year 13. Pretty extraordinary life he's lived, and he's still going strong. And we're working every day together, collaborating on this book about his life and the extraordinary story of why he continues to live the life he lives and how he does it. I think that's an interesting part of it. Just to get through a day, it requires a lot of resources and a lot of caregiving, 24/7 caregiving. And it's, it's pretty remarkable. I feel very lucky and grateful to be able to work on this project.
Yeah, I can't help but think about this, and we'll plant it in the world that you and I come from, the world that you're still in a big way. And that is that, you and I, we spent a lot of time around really amazing editors and writers and the writing process and deep investigative reporting and breaking news and deep stories that are multiple, parts in a series and all of that. And, to watch that process unfold oftentimes is you get into a room with other editors, you talk it through, you bounce ideas off of each other. It's often like a brainstorming session to say, okay, is that piece relevant to this story? If we cover this, then it's going to take us down this track. Do we want to go there? We take for granted how quick that process is. You can go into a meeting for an hour and decide, yeah, this is where we need to go drill down a little bit more. And then we're going to reflect a little bit more in this area. And we're going to take this out of the story. And it's all kind of these pieces flying around in the meeting. But by the time you get out of the meeting, you kind of have a direction about where you want to go with the story. With Steve, though, he communicates using a computer and this eye capability. It literally types with his eyes, so it's a very slow process. And he thinks very clearly. You can talk about that, but that has got to be grueling to go through that process.
Yeah, and right now, Steve's having some issues with his eyes, which of course is his life right now. Is all his existence is determined by his eyes. It's the way he communicates with his family and his caregivers, and the way he communicates with the world. And that is vital to his existence. And the progression of the disease has started. That's one of the unique things about ALS is it doesn't affect your eyes. So he's able to use what they call eye gaze technology to type using infrared beam that goes into his retina, and he's able to concentrate on a keyboard and communicate that way. And that's how we're writing the book together. But when he's having struggles right now closing his eyes, so as you can imagine, just how devastating that can be. He has to actually tape his eyes shut numerous times throughout the day just to lubricate his eyes and to be able to function. And we're navigating that. It's typical of the disease. There's always something new that causes a new adjustment. But in the end, this book's going to be incredible. I think people will be inspired by his story, and I think it'll help a lot of people who are going through whatever struggles in their own lives, different adversity, how you embrace that and get to the other side of it. Because certainly what Steve's going through right now, he and Michelle, is much greater challenge than anything I've ever faced in my life.
It's we'll talk. I'm going to talk to Todd Trenchard about this in the next segment. But Todd's got a great story, which I won't go into so much here. But it's simply that, in spite of Steve's challenges, and what's important that you continue to point out to me, this book is not necessarily about ALS. It's about living life with optimism, no matter what your conditions are. That there is redemption in the world, and it's all often down to what's in your heart and soul, and what's in your mind and how you think about it. But that's such a powerful part of his story, isn't it?
Well, it's the thing we're trying to get across is, Steve will tell you every day he's grateful for the life he's living. And that's remarkable, right? I mean, he's basically paralyzed in a wheelchair every day, has to require help to get through the day, someone to bathe him, to put his clothes on. It can be a tremendous burden and mental challenge to keep going with those, extraordinary hurdles in front of you every day. But he's remarkable that way. And the other thing that's interesting about him, Ricky, is he's attracted amazing people around him. The orbit that he and Michelle have, they just have a gravitational pull on very inspiring, aspirational people. I mean, there's the Team Gleason group, his caregivers, everyone around Steve is just exceptional human beings. So it's inspiring to be around him and to see how they work and motivate and what they've done at Team Gleason to help people with this awful disease. And I have no doubt eventually they're going to lead to better understanding and a cure. And a lot of it's going to be because of the work that Steve has done at Team Gleason and that organization. I mean, they grew from three basically employees to now they have well over 20, and they've had to move offices 3 different times because they've grown so quickly. And that's going to be part of Steve's legacy.
That's so awesome. And as you said so many times, just going through the process with him, it's changed your life. I mean, you'll never be the same Jeff Duncan again. You're going through a new iteration, a new appreciation. I can only imagine what's flying through your mind these days.
Well, Thomas Morstead, former Saints punter, who's good friends with Steve and Michelle, their families are close. He always says, Steve's a daily dose of perspective, and I think that's a perfect way to put it. It does put things in perspective for you when you think you're having trouble in life, and then you go over and spend a day with Steve, which we do literally every day. I'll be leaving here after the podcast to go have a writing session with him and Michelle, and you realize you don't have a lot to complain about. So I do think clearly, and Steve, the thing about Steve is he still has a tremendous sense of humor that comes across in the book. I mean, they're able to kind of make light of the situation a lot of times. We're going through cover ideas right now, and they're joking around of like having Steve on his wheelchair falling off of the side, in front of an oak tree, and just making fun of things. I mean, it's not all, and this book will not be droll and somber. It will be inspiring and uplifting to people because of the way Steve approaches life.
Hey, you mentioned, we got to go to the break, but you mentioned Thomas Morstead. I saw a tweet from him where he was thanking his family and those around him for supporting him as he literally re-engineered himself. He got back into shape and really came back to be a really, really good punter in the NFL. And he's looking forward to the upcoming season. He's a story in and of itself. We'll get your thoughts about that, and then we'll talk about Derek Carr and so much other stuff swirling around people like Michael Thomas, et cetera. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. As I chat with my friend Jeff Duncan, and obviously it's such an interesting diversion to talk about the work that he's doing with Steve Gleason, to write Steve Gleason's book, but it is an incredible story about hope and redemption and optimism in really tough circumstances. In fact, we'll talk more about that in the next segment with Todd Trenchard. But you mentioned, you heard what I said about Thomas Morstead. It's really incredible the way that this guy could have retired, but instead of doing that, am I right? 15th year, is that right? He's going into
that's right. Yes, I think you're right.
My God, I mean, the way he's rebuilt himself and refocused himself is a great story in and of itself, isn't it?
Well, I remember, Ricky, when the Saints, I think they traded up to take Thomas Morstead, and I think it was the 4th round when they drafted him. And I remember distinctly criticizing them in the Times-Picayune for doing it. You just don't trade up to take a punter, and it looks like that was one of the better moves they ever made. So it shows you what I knew back then, because Morstead turned out to be a Pro Bowl caliber punter. They never had to worry about it. He was a remarkably versatile punter. He can punt with directional kicks. He can hang it up high. He can do the back spin. And my favorite story, I tell this all the time, my favorite story of my journalism career was on Thomas Morstead's family, because he is the son. His mother was born in England. His grandparents still live on a farm in Beelsby, England, a little small community up in northern England. And when we went over there for the Saints game in London, myself and Michael DeMacher took a train up to Beelsby, 3 or 4 hours up in the countryside of England, and learned how they taught Thomas to kick a rugby ball on this farm, and that's where he learned to punt. It was all from his English roots, so it's a pretty remarkable story, and his parents still go to every game that he plays, it's all because of his English roots. He's been a tremendous pro, and he's having a great comeback career in Miami right now.
What a cool part to the story. You actually reached out to him in the last few days, right?
Yeah, we tried to get him to come over. I'm going to be moderating some panels at the Tulane Book Festival this weekend, and we wanted to get Thomas on the panel, but unfortunately he's not going to be able to make it. He's actually going to be in D.C. for the NFL Players Association. He's the representative for the Dolphins. But I would like to plug that, because if your listeners or viewers have not been over to the Tulane Book Festival, I highly encourage you. If you've got nothing going on this weekend or you're looking for something to do, there's kids activities, kids reading events. It is a big deal, Ricky. This event is going to be one of the bigger events in the country as far as literary festivals. It's basically being run by Walter Isaacson, of course, the former editor of Time magazine. His Rolodex is pretty deep. I mean, he used to run the Aspen Institute. They've got Bill Gates coming to do an event on Friday night, Eric Holder, the former Attorney General, Maggie Haberman from the New York Times, Michael Lewis, Malcolm Gladwell, just incredible think tank for the weekend, and all kinds of sessions. It's not just about writing books. It's really about politics and current events. Just an extraordinary event that's going to be bigger and bigger every year on the social calendar here in New Orleans. And it fits perfectly between Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest every year. So it's kind of a good way to chill out, kind of go make yourself think a little bit. And I think having it's all free too. So you can go to any of these sessions. A lot of them are standing room only because of the headliners, but really looking forward to that this weekend.
Malcolm Gladwell, former associate of ours at Advanced Condé Nast, who wrote The Tipping Point, and Walter Isaacson. Man, what an incredible author he is. His book on Steve Jobs will be one of my favorite for forever. What we learned about leadership and visionary people like Steve Jobs in his book was just incredible. I enjoyed getting to know Walter while I was in New Orleans. Okay, so let's shift gears. Okay. We got him. We got our man. It's the difference, isn't it, Jeff?
Well, it was huge for Dennis Allen. He needed that win, if you will. He needed to restore some confidence, I think, and not only the fan base, but I think also in the locker room, Ricky. I mean, players want to win right now. This team's built to win, and the last 2 years they haven't been able to do it. In a large part, a big part of that's been the substandard quarterback play. Derek Carr is, I think, by all accounts, proven commodity, 4-time Pro Bowler. When you think about that, I mean, the only Pro Bowl quarterbacks the Saints have ever had, and Archie Manning and Drew Brees. So they're bringing in a guy that is proven at the NFL level, and I think immediately makes the Saints the favorites in the NFC South. The quarterback position is just it's such a sorry state right now with every team. No one really has a set situation. The Saints immediately vaulted to the front of the pack by getting Derek Carr.
And the buzz, I call it the social media swagger around him, is really positive. It's awesome to see that, isn't it?
Yeah, players obviously did a lot of recruiting. Our beat writer, Luke Johnson's got a tremendous story that's going to run this weekend. I think everyone should read. It's basically the story of the recruitment of Derek Carr, all the behind the scenes, how they were able to lure him in. And look, they went a full court press. They had players calling him, coaches calling him. They brought his wife in. They wined and dined them in New Orleans fashion, gave them a tour of the neighborhoods. They showed Derek Carr the most love, and ultimately that's what won out in that competition for him. Now they've got to do it. They've got to win. He's got to produce. This team now will have expectations, and I think they put their money where their mouth is in terms of backing it up with the resources. The largest contract, Ricky, in the history of the franchise, $150 million commitment. And that's the going rate for quarterbacks these days. They're up around $40 million a year. So it's pretty amazing how far that's come. I can remember when Drew Brees got $20 million a year, and it seemed extraordinary. And now that's, basically half of what these top quarterbacks make.
And you wrote a column about Michael Thomas that said, should he stay or should he go? Or will he stay or will he go? I think he's going to stay, but what's your thought?
Yeah, I think it's going to come down. We're going to find out soon. I mean, the due date on his contract is March 17th, which is next Friday. And the Saints will if they want to bring him back, and he wants to come back, they're going to have to renegotiate his contract. There's a $31 million roster bonus that they have to pay him in 2024. They're not going to pay that. So they're going to have to renegotiate his contract, and he's going to have to be willing to take a little bit of a pay cut, restructure the deal. And I think that's what it'll come down to. Is he willing? How much are the Saints willing to pay him? Can they make a incentive-laden deal that works for him to come back and maybe play on a one-year deal or a short-term contract and kind of a prove-it contract, right? I mean, he hadn't played in 3 years. He's not going to make the $20 million a year he was earning on his old contract. He knows that. But I do think having Derek Carr in the building certainly enhances the Saints' chances of getting him back because he's such a good quarterback.
So free agency is coming up. We've talked a lot about the unfortunate demise of Alvin Kamara from a legal point of view, and the fact that we probably won't have him for most of the year next year, if at all next year. So there's going to be a lot of focus on running back, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think they'll look in not only the free agent market for a veteran, but also I think they'll look in the draft. I mean, you can get a running back these days. The positions become so devalued, Ricky, in today's game. I mean, it's one of the least, the lowest paid positions in the NFL. And I can think, 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. It was a premier position. So I think the Saints will look in both markets and cover their bases because we don't know what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara in terms of discipline. But I think you have to go in thinking he's going to miss some time, probably a minimum of 6 games, maybe more. And you have to have a premier running back to play at that position, especially in this offense. That's a gaping hole that they have to address this offseason.
Is it true that Sean Payton really would like to steal Taysom Hill?
I don't think so. I haven't heard him say. I don't know how you can steal him. I mean, he's under contract with the Saints, and the Saints highly value Taysom Hill. I mean, we've seen him carry the team in some of these games. I think Taysom Hill's happy here. I think Taysom Hill ultimately would like to be a starting quarterback. He said that, but he's not going to have that opportunity in Denver either. So I don't see any reason for that to happen. I know he's always loved Taysom Hill. We've all known that, but he's under contract. There's really nothing he can do. It'd be tampering for him to even approach him.
Well, you've seen the clickbait out there, and it's just crazy how that's out there, isn't it?
I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't seen it, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, people try to put two and two together, right, with Sean Payton and the Saints. Now, I do think free agent wise, say a guy like Marcus Davenport or some of the other players that Sean Payton's familiar with, certainly he's going to take a look at. I mean, they have basically 9 assistant coaches on the Payton staff that have connections to the Saints. So that familiarity would probably lead them to pursue some of the players that they know about. That's just natural. That you're going to go with the devil you know, not the devil you don't know. So we'll see how that plays out. It's going to get hot and heavy next week once free agency starts.
Ooh, man. I mean, we could lose some players. We could gain some players, but hopefully our top 10 defense remains mostly intact. Do you think it will?
Well, I'm a little concerned about the front line. Marcus Davenport is going to be a highly recruited free agent. I think they need help. They only have one defensive tackle under contract. So, Cam Jordan has played well, but he's older. He's up in his 30s. I think that's an area that they can't take for granted.
It's going to be interesting to watch. And next week, you're going to be full of tons of information about all the behind-the-scenes maneuvering that's happening. But anyway, Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. It's been great to catch up with you, my friend.
Thanks, Ricky. Everybody have a great weekend. Don't forget Tulane Book Festival, and we'll talk about the Saints free agent moves next week when we visit.
Absolutely. We'll see you after this with Todd Trenchard.